Good Sunday afternoon, everyone. Thanks for tuning in to another Southern Oregon Weather Weekend update. I hope you're safe. I hope you're well. What a crazy week it's been. I want to talk mainly today about our fire weather forecast. We'll talk about our wind, the smoke, the potential for rainfall later this week, and then at the end, as usual, we'll talk about our longer-term outlook. But first I want to start with a retrospective analysis on the conditions that helped create our big fire event earlier this last week. So this was the 500 millibar map on the day of the fire, Tuesday, September 8th. You can see much lower pressure over the Rockies, much higher than normal pressure over the West Coast and the Gulf of Alaska, and you can see the strong east to west pressure gradient that set up here. And it was mirrored at the surface, at the lower levels of the atmosphere, by a similarly strong pressure gradient. On the east side here you see this colder, denser continental air flooding in and pushing all the way up to the Cascades. But the Cascades here are acting as a barrier. And so that cold air can't reach the west side, and on the west side there's much warmer, lighter, less dense air. And you can see these tight lines here that indicate an extreme pressure gradient. The cold air here is denser, and so it's looking for a place to go. And the way it wants to go is toward areas of lower pressure where the air is less dense, and there's room for more air, if you will. And so this set up a very strong east to southeast wind event. We had gusts of 30, 40 miles per hour in the Rogue Valley. And I had talked about the potential for some north to northeast, maybe even easterly flow. But I really didn't anticipate that the pressure gradient would be this strong in my previous video. When I saw it setting up at the beginning of last week, I started getting pretty nervous because these were similar conditions to the conditions that helped produce the Tillamook fire in 1922, which was also incredibly destructive. And so I was nervous. Another thing that can happen with these east to west wind events is that the air gets very, very dry. So in addition to the strong wind, we also had very low relative humidity levels, and that's because as the air descends the mountains, which is called downsloping, it warms up and it dries out significantly. So we had strong winds, near record low relative humidity levels, and that was just the perfect setup for a catastrophic fire event, which unfortunately ended up happening. This is one of these situations where you know that the weather conditions are dangerous, but you can't prevent every spark. So it was a difficult situation. So we want to know from now going forward, are things going to get better or are things going to get worse? Well, here's our current 500 millibar pattern according to the GFS for Sunday afternoon, and it's vastly different. Now we have higher heights over the Rockies, and we have a trough sitting offshore. Our flow is coming from a completely different direction. It's southwesterly now instead of easterly. So we're in a completely different pressure pattern right now. And you can see this upper level low sitting offshore is starting to send out some disturbances. And this was a very weak cold front that was moving through as I was recording this video in the early afternoon. You can see this band of clouds pushing into our area. You can also see on this satellite image the fires. And the brighter areas are where the heat is most intense. You can see the Lion's Head and Beachy Creek fires up north. You can see the Oban Chain, a little bit of the Oban Chain fire. You can see the Slatter fire. And it's nice to note that the heat signature from the Oban Chain and the Slatter fires is not very large at the moment. Now with this front, we're having a bit of a wind shift. So obviously we had very strong southeasterly winds blowing down the valley last week. But this afternoon, and tomorrow afternoon as well, we're going to see a more typical northwesterly wind set up in the afternoon. These wind barbs here indicate the direction that the wind is coming from. So the little tails show where the wind is coming from, and the little arrows here show where the wind is blowing to. So you can see we're getting some northwest winds blowing up the valley for this afternoon. The colors here indicate wind speed in knots. So blues are around 5 knots, greens are around 10 knots. That's roughly 5 to 10 miles per hour, a little bit faster. You can see for tomorrow, the picture's similar. Maybe a little bit more wind over the higher terrain, but the direction is still the same, northwest to west. This, unfortunately, is pushing the Oban chain fire somewhat in the direction of Butte Falls, and they're trying hard as I'm recording this video to prevent the fire from encroaching on the city any further. And the last I heard, they were being successful at the moment. You can see over the Slatter fire, the winds are going to be generally west as well. So that's our wind situation. What that means is that the smoke could improve a little bit, because instead of south to southeast flow pushing smoke up from California, instead under this northwest wind in the afternoon, we could see some of this smoke move east. And so this is what the smoke situation looks like by early tomorrow morning, according to the HRRR model. So here's what it's like right now. These purples indicate levels over 200. And this is what it's supposed to be by this evening. Early tomorrow morning. So I think there could be some improvement. There's an inversion in the valleys currently, so the lower levels of the air aren't moving very much, but these northwest winds could help mix things out a little bit and maybe give us some improvement in smoke over the next day or two. So going forward a few days, this upper level trough is still sitting around, and as it moves closer, it's going to give us a chance of showers, which is very, very good news indeed. This corresponds really well with MJO Phase 4, and we did talk about this in the last video. MJO Phase 4 is definitely a cooler signal for our area at this time of the year. And here we are, the Europeans showing that over the next few days, that's where we'll be spending most of our time. So we can be very grateful for MJO Phase 4 because that's going to give us our chance of rain during the middle and latter part of the week. Northern areas of the state are going to see a shot at rain as early as Monday and Tuesday. But here in Southern Oregon, our chance for rain won't really arrive until Wednesday, Thursday, Friday, heading into the weekend. And you can see here, according to the WPC on the Weather Prediction Center, we could see up to a quarter to maybe a half inch of rain. And the GFS is calling for about a half inch of rain on the high end. The Canadian is showing similar amounts. The Icon, which is a German product, is showing a little bit less. It's a little bit on the drier side. And the WRF is a little bit more in line with the Icon. These are hundredths of an inch, so these green and purple areas, that's about a fifth of an inch or so. So 1 to 2/10 of an inch. So if we take a blend of all of those solutions, we could maybe see the potential for a quarter of an inch in spots in the valley. But again, the air in place is so dry, I wouldn't be surprised if we end up with just a tenth. So going forward into the rest of the month, are we going to see a repeat scenario? And I really don't think so. We, at this time of year, do have troughs that can drop into the Rockies and create an east to west pressure gradient, but this was a particularly extreme scenario, and I just don't think it's going to repeat. there's somewhat of a hint here of a somewhat similar pattern, but again, look at the contrast between the heights. It's so much lower. The ridge over the west coast has really mellowed out, and the trough moving into the Rockies is much weaker, and so this isn't even in the same league. The Canadian ensemble suggests that this trough that's going to bring us our rain later this week hangs around for a little while, into the weekend and maybe even the beginning of next week. And I think I tend to agree with this because the European is showing a similar scenario. So that could be good news because it will likely mean our humidity levels stay a little bit higher and we enjoy a little bit cooler air, and that northwest flow continues to move some of the smoke out of our area. So heading toward the end of the month, the models are showing an interesting scenario. They're showing the ridge rebuilding briefly and then shifting to the east. And they're showing a very, very large area of low pressure developing in the Gulf of Alaska. Here's the GFS, the American Ensemble. This is by Saturday, September 26th. And the Canadian Ensemble is also hinting at something similar, and I would add the European is as well, a little bit earlier in the month. So why do I think this could happen? Well, here's our PNA index, and typically we'd associate a negative PNA with a trough, so cooler and wetter conditions during the winter time. During the summer, it's a little bit different. In September and October, actually, what we want is a positive PNA if we're looking for cooler and wetter weather. And you can see we get a pretty strongly positive PNA by the end of the month of September. And here's that look that we saw on the computer models. A strong trough in the Gulf of Alaska and a ridge over the Rockies. Look at the similarities, especially with the GEFS here. So that's an indication that the models are onto something. Also, our analogs, if you remember, 2005 and 2016, had this idea for October. So it makes sense that we would see at least a hint of this going into the end of the month of September. So good news for fire activity. If this trough can move close enough to the west coast to send some fronts and disturbances our way, that means the end of the month could be a little bit wet. But we'll have to see how that pans out. In the meantime, we've talked about the weather conditions that led to the fire catastrophe. We had a very strong pressure gradient, and thankfully I just don't see that happening again, probably not for a really long time. It was certainly a unique event. It's happened before, but it doesn't happen very often. Usually our winds are from the northwest, not the southeast. And we're getting into more of a typical wind pattern. Now, as a weekend dry cold front brings some light northwest winds today and tomorrow, that should help improve the smoke a little bit tonight into tomorrow. We do have an upper level low pressure system bringing a chance for rain throughout this week, mainly from the middle of the week on, possibly up to 1/4 of an inch, maybe a 1/2 inch for some areas that get hit with a little bit of convective precipitation, so thunderstorms. But at this point, I would say probably about 1/10 of an inch for valley areas, and that's thanks to our friend MJO Phase 4. And then in weeks 2 and 3, heading into the end of the month, we do have the ridge rebuilding in the wake of this low pressure system, but it could shift east, and we could come under the influence of this strong Gulf of Alaska trough, which we would hope for because we really need the rain. And it's very similar to our analog pattern for October, and we do have the support of the positive PNA for this pattern as well. So that's something that I'll continue to keep an eye on and that we can possibly look forward to. So guys, thanks so much for tuning in. Don't forget to set your notifications. Most importantly, stay safe and healthy.